the problem is not plastic. The problem is the way we use resources. Because if we're going to change single-use plastic for single-use glass, that's going to make things worse. If we change single-use plastic PET with single-use paper, it's going to get worse.
Welcome back, everybody. Rich Brubaker, founder of Collective Responsibility, here today with another episode of the Sustainable Monster Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Joan Marc Simon, who is the founder and co-director of Zero Waste Europe. It's a network of 33 zero waste groups across 27 European countries with the mission of redesigning relationships with resources. And I love that kind of statement because as someone who's worked in waste for many years, I talk about waste as being a misallocation of valued resources. And I know, Joan Marc, you just came back from the plastic treaty conversations. You work on systems, you work with supply chains, you work with materials. And so I'm really excited to have you join us to talk about the work that you're doing, the progress you're seeing, and maybe some of the lessons you've learned being in this space for so long.
So my name is Joan Marc, and as you have said, I'm the co-director at Zero Waste Europe. It's an organization that does basically three things. One is to try to change policies, European policies, but together with our local groups, national policies. Second thing we do is try to implement zero waste solutions. So we work with hundreds of municipalities and companies to design waste out of the system. And the third thing we do is also, when necessary, we actually convene other stakeholders, be it civil society groups, be it companies, whatever, to make change happen.
What is the size and scope of the waste challenge that you see in the work that you're doing right now?
So for me, the hot topics these days is actually how do you go to the root of the problem? Of course, recycling is important, but actually how do you create the systems for stuff, be it textiles, be it packaging, be it food, be it whatever, last a lot longer, be a lot more repairable, have no toxic components in it, and ensure that that's at the end recyclable. But recycling is for us kind of the end of pipe solution.
Like where are we breaking down from creating those closed loop or those zero waste solutions that you've been hammering on?
So on one hand, from the management perspective, a clear issue is collection. We have a problem with actually the fact that most of the waste is not collected, and when we collect it, we don't collect it in a way that is actually suitable for a proper treatment or recycling. But then there's the other challenge as well, that all this production doesn't take into account the fact that this is going to become waste, and that there's actually no thinking about how are we going to reintroduce those resources into the economy. So actually, how do you make sure you capture what is in there to make sure it stays in the economy for as long as possible? It's not only an environmental issue, it's a geopolitical issue as well.
For most conversations around waste, I'd argue that we use an environmental or sometimes even a moral lens. Like, we cannot do this to the world. But you've been mentioning economics quite a bit. What is the balance there that you see? And is there one of those that moves the ball forward faster?
Sure. From an economic perspective, one of the problems we have is that waste, it is valuable, but the value of most of the waste out there doesn't compensate the cost of collecting it and recycling. So everything is recyclable. But the truth is that the stuff that we're producing, it takes too much money, too much energy to recycle it. So there's some stuff such as metals, etc., that if in right volumes are profitable. But for the rest, actually, it's not profitable to collect and recycle all that waste. So from an economic perspective, the question is, how do you change the incentives so that it's profitable, or at least somebody pays for the collection of and treatment of all this waste?
And do you view that as the responsibility of governments or nonprofits or corporates or consumers? Like, who should make that economic equation work?
Well, I think it's a mix, but of course, the economy is a social construct. And if the markets don't give the right signs or the right incentives, then it's policymakers who need to create the right framework so that doing the right thing is easier and cheaper than doing the wrong thing. Today, we don't have the regulatory framing for people to do the right thing because it's more expensive and it's harder to work. So why should they?
10, 15 years ago, no one really cared, right? Except for a few environmental NGOs. Who's waking up and what are they trying to get done?
It's not because recycling is profitable. It's just because the cost for the brands or for the countries to bear with so much, for example, plastic pollution is becoming so unbearable that they have to take action. And what we see is that, yes, we managed to collect it, but we are not recycling that much of it. And the volumes continue to increase. So actually, if we go to the source of the problem, yes, we have very good collection. We have recycling, but the environmental impact continues to increase.
What are the challenges of the recycling end? Do they have the manufacturing base that requires these materials? Is that the problem, or is it just the materials themselves aren't really recyclable?
honestly, like most of the materials out there, they are not designed for recycling. Either the alloy is too complex, or the volumes are too small, or the collection is not there. So actually, like, to have efficient recycling where actually you need volumes, you need the right infrastructure, and you need the right incentives, that happens for a minority of materials.
So I want to get to the plastic treaty. I had a lot of friends that were there, including yourself. For the audience that may not have been aware of what was happening, what was this meeting? What brought it about? And what happened?
The Global Plastic Treaty is an initiative of UNEA 5 in Nairobi, like 2 years ago. The United Nations Environmental Program got the mandate to draft the Global Plastic Treaty. And basically where we are is that on one hand, there's the geopolitics of all of this, who has the power in this world to decide what others do. And that's what we saw with like a number of countries, mostly oil producers or plastic producers, having a different agenda from those who are actually suffering the impacts of plastic pollution without having actually benefiting from it.
Right.
And yeah, what we saw is right now we are not yet we're halfway to it. Now the Secretariat has got the mandate to produce a zero draft treaty, which basically means the first text, and then we'll see what is going to be the scope, what does plastic pollution mean, and what are the tools that are going to be considered.
How much misalignment is there right now? Is it a big gap between states, or is there actually a common general understanding that we need to fix this, and then they're just fixing the language, or they're just trying to find the common space that they can work together?
Well, the key thing here, like with the climate negotiations, is what is the scope, who is responsible, and who pays. There is alignment that we have a problem with plastic pollution, in the sense that plastic waste should be collected and should be recycled. There you get alignment, and that's probably what you're going to get out of the treaty. There's not alignment on what plastic pollution is. For example, the oil spills, which is basically the precursor to produce plastic, is that plastic pollution? Or like plastic nurdles actually leaking, or microfibers from textile washing, is that plastic pollution? There's no alignment on that. Also, are we talking about single-use plastic? Are we talking about textiles? Are we talking about plastics in planes or built environment? There's no alignment on that either. There's some areas where I think there's going to be action on the collection of single-use plastic in the environment. There's going to be the support to actually for the brands to pay for the collection via EPR systems. I think that we're going to see. But beyond that, honestly, we need to see.
I mean, obviously, I think we can all look out the window and say a lot of things are going wrong, but some progress is being made, right? What are some things that you're seeing that are giving you hope that either the stakeholders are coming together finally to address the problem, or consumers are finally doing something? Or
having worked on plastic now since more than 10 years, I can see that the world has changed a lot. It was not long ago when actually you had big brands such as Coke or Pepsi saying that we didn't have a problem with plastic pollution, that deposit and refund systems were not necessary, and actually were campaigning against them. And today you have brands such as Nestle, Coke, Pepsi, Mars, etc., saying that we need reduction in the use of virgin plastics, that we need reuse targets, that we need to actually make sure that we close loop for recycling, that we need DRS systems. That is a big change. So from that perspective, I think we are moving forward.
How long do you think it'll take Nestle and Coke to actually get to the point where they say they've actually made real progress?
If this global plastic treaty give a clear direction, clear guidelines on what needs to happen, that would be useful. Otherwise, the only way to actually have fast change is through a proper crisis. And again, I want to highlight the problem we have with plastic and this issue is, if we look at packaging, is that we're seeing lots of material substitution, and that's also not good. I mean, the problem with the global plastic treaty is that we're saying that plastic is the problem. And the problem is not plastic. The problem is the way we use resources. Because if we're going to change single-use plastic for single-use glass, that's going to make things worse. If we change single-use PET with single-use paper, it's going to get worse. So actually, we need to be careful with all these substitutions. That's why we need systemic thinking, and that's why you need actually proper policies.
A lot of people think, well, bioplastics is better, or corn or sugar-based plastics are better, but in reality, they have a different trade-off. How much awareness do you see right now in that space? Is that a space that we need to solve before we even get to solutions, or is that commonly understood within the stakeholders that you're engaging with?
Well, there's different levels of understanding, but in general, still, I don't think that systemic thinking is there, because companies, of course, they care about the stuff they put in the market. If you are a chemical company, you want to sell chemicals. So that's the limitations, that's the boundaries of their systems. And the challenge that we're having is that in any system or system change, you need to set the boundaries of the system. Clearly, we have one planet, those are planetary boundaries, but how do these boundaries actually translate to the day-to-day decisions in the companies? That we don't have. And I think that's the gap. We need to find a way to actually to set these boundaries and then let the market and let the companies operate.
In that sense, tell me about the work that you do. Your job has been in this space for quite a while. You've been one of the leaders in Europe on this topic. What is the work that you do on kind of a daily basis to turn the ship around, to generate awareness, or to support those who are trying to make progress?
We are here to create systems and then provide opportunities. So my day-to-day work consists of that, basically talk to policymakers, talk to brands, talk to companies, producers, etc., and try to bring this holistic picture to come up with ideas of actually how the boundaries of this system can be articulated, and three, convene and try to propose solutions. Sometimes it's in legislation, some other times is actually creating certifications, some other times is engaging in sometimes even brainstorming on how to do things better.
So when did waste become your mission? And I guess what catalyzed you into working on this issue? Was there you saw a turtle on the with a straw coming out of its nose? What drove you to this challenge?
That's a good question, because honestly, I don't have an environmentalist background, and I didn't study environmental science, any of this. My background is in economics. I mean, the economics I was learning basically didn't have any boundaries and were disconnected from reality. I mean, markets were supposed to be perfect and we're supposed to take all rational decisions and all this blah blah. And one day, basically, I was doing some lobby work for different organizations, and I found actually a way to connect my past, my training about economics. I say, okay, this is a clear symptom that something is not working. And it's a way to actually to bring economics back to the real world. That was basically the catalyst. It was not one day. It was when I realized that actually, yes, I'm interested in economics, but I'm interested in a way that actually make economics work and real for people.
But are you driven personally by the emotional side of the environmental problems, or are you more driven by just the puzzle of trying to figure out this economics challenge?
It's both. It's both, because I think you need both. You need the passion, actually, that's the emotional connection to the topic, but there's also this intellectual curiosity that actually has seen the impact, not only in terms of resource changing the way we build resources. It's also seeing how the people change, how you build relationships, how actually the importance of a community that works well generates less waste than a community that is not properly structured. And that for me was quite telling. So actually that the root of waste this is not a technical issue. This is a social issue.
And so what's your process for understanding systems or understanding the big picture? Is it just conversations? Is it reading? Is it going out to the field? What are the things that really helped you gain a good understanding of these systems that you're trying to change?
That's a good question, because obviously that's not something you get overnight. I think you need to read a lot, understand how power dynamics work, how policies are made, how the economy works, and how society operates. And of course, lots of on-site visits, understanding also the side of the business, understanding the side of the impacted consumers, etc. All of that is important. But I think what is important is really to be open and be curious. It's important to focus, but at the same time have an open mindset. So I think it's important really to have this holistic picture if you want to get a holistic picture. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite piece of work was that in Shanghai and in China, Asia, you have a lot of informal recyclers who are running around with kind of these little flatbed tricycles. And so it's like a bicycle up front with a kind of a pickup truck back, and they'll stack all the recycling. And one day I was like, where does all that go? Just being really curious and just where does that go? So my team and we started following them around, interviewing them, putting GPS devices into the trash, watching it go on our app to figure out where it all went. We were just really curious. And it was almost like this romantic interest of where your shit goes. It's like, what happens to it when you throw it away? As interesting as it was also really fun because it fed into economics. It highlighted the people and the work that's being done by those people to sort through things. It busted a bunch of myths for us as well.
Yeah, it's funny, right? Because I mean, what you see is that the data says one thing, but actually the real world is different. You follow the informal recyclers, and you realize actually that they give a value to materials that is not captured in statistics or in figures, and that's very interesting. Yeah.
What's the role of passion in your job? How do you maintain it, given we see the size, scale, and scope of this problem actually going the wrong way right now? Like, how do you keep focused on the job when you know that the work you've been doing is still not seeing the reaction you thought it would?
I mean, obviously, looking 20 years back, I thought that we could change things faster, and we definitely need to change things faster. I also look around and say, okay, I think there's like young people who need support and who need hope. And maybe I can provide more support than hope at this stage. But I think like we are all needed in this transition, and those of us who actually have managed to gather enough knowledge, etc., it's important that we stay there. And honestly, I still have that passion to actually to see things change, and that's what keeps me going. Also, talking to my children, that really helps, because anybody who has children, I think what the world I will leave to them, that is an issue, but. Yeah, passion is very important.
How do you remain patient during that change? Because I think you and I would both agree over the last 10 years, we've seen progress. Is it as much as we wanted? Probably not. But the fact is, if you looked moment to moment along that path, most rational people would have given up. You have to find a way to remain patient. So how do you remain patient? How do you find ways to deliver outsized impact over time? Like, what are some advice around that?
At the end of the day, what I would like give as advice is like, you need to be comfortable with doing what you're doing. It's not a matter of sacrificing yourself and your well-being for something. You also this needs to make sense. And if you feel that you're sacrificing everything for something and it's getting enough return, that's I would say there's no point continuing there. So actually, you need to build your life around your passions in a way. But if it's all about sacrifice, just it's not worth it.
Now, if you were young coming out of university and you're looking at, and waste is the topic you want to focus on, you want a job, you want a career, what are a couple areas you think that really need young, passionate people to come into the workforce? Is it within brands on material side? Is it nonprofits and activists? Like, where are the jobs as part of this transition to a net zero or a zero waste world?
What I see lots of young people coming out of university going into, and I would advise, because it's the right thing, is in anything that has to do with reuse systems and new delivery systems. I see lots of innovation in that front. And this innovation is not coming from the big brands, it's coming from young entrepreneurs that really come with crazy ideas. And of course, many of them fail, but then they will try something else, and that's the right thing to do. That's where I see that, as going back to the beginning of our conversation, we need to stop managing waste and need to start actually preventing it. And the way to prevent it is actually create systems that don't generate waste in the first place. And the young generations are understanding that. And the young generations, what I see is that I'm coaching lots of young entrepreneurs who are starting these kind of startups on reuse. And I think we're going to see a radical change in this field in the next years, because this is kind of mushrooming, and now they're getting to scale, and it makes all the sense in the world.
Now, if you were young coming out of university and you're looking at, and waste is the topic you want to focus on, you want a job, you want a career, what are a couple areas you think that really need young, passionate people to come into the workforce? Is it within brands on material side? Is it nonprofits and activists? Like, where are the jobs as part of this transition to a net zero or a zero waste world?
What I see lots of young people coming out of university going into, and I would advise, because it's the right thing, is in anything that has to do with reuse systems and new delivery systems. I see lots of innovation in that front. And this innovation is not coming from the big brands, it's coming from young entrepreneurs that really come with crazy ideas. And of course, many of them fail, but then they will try something else, and that's the right thing to do. That's where I see that, as going back to the beginning of our conversation, we need to stop managing waste and need to start actually preventing it. And the way to prevent it is actually create systems that don't generate waste in the first place. And the young generations are understanding that. And the young generations, what I see is that I'm coaching lots of young entrepreneurs who are starting these kind of startups on reuse. And I think we're going to see like a radical change in this field in the next years, because this is kind of mushrooming, and now they're getting to scale, and it makes all the sense in the world.